Yep. Let's call this meeting to order. This is the Livingston Parish Ordinance Committee, Tuesday, July 26, 2022. It is roughly 6:08 p.m. Ms. White, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Girlinghouse?
Here.
Mr. Mack is absent. Mr. Talbert?
Here.
Mr. Ard?
Here.
Old business, the dirt fill. I think Mr. Morris is the one who's leading on this, and he sent us a notice earlier, said that he won't be able to make it tonight. But if any of y'all wanted to discuss anything on it, we'll leave it on the agenda. Anything? The dirt fill ordinance.
Dirt fill.
Anybody got discussion on dirt field ordinance?
I guess the only question.
Come on up. Let's go.
Can
you hear me now?
In there? Is that on? Yeah, there it is.
Scott Lobel, 18052 Louisiana Highway 444. I guess the only question I have is there somewhere that it's written where you can see or go read and review it of what we'll be talking about? I know at one time there was discussion of the older one that was proposed or anything, so if we just kind of wanted to read it and see what our opinion was, where would we find that?
Well,
I think we have a couple of them, huh?
Lauren, is there anything kind of
They have to call
formalized?
us and we'll email them.
It's not.
Yeah.
Look, he basically said today, I think he wants it to apply to subdivisions, and he said, let's see. You want to read what he said, Lauren?
Says, Lauren, I will not make it tonight due to work. I have a shutdown starting at 3 today, and that we will have to be complete by 8 p.m. Sorry if the other men would like to continue. I'm good with stopping all subdivisions from building up greater than 3 feet with a slope on each house pad. I do not want to put a limit on homeowners that are developing 1 acre or more.
So that was what he wanted to do with respect to it. So, and then Scooter texted me tonight on the way, and he said, don't forget about fill mitigation. I said, where's the ordinance? He said, I don't have it yet, but thought y'all could hash it out and see if y'all think it might help. I said, okay. And so basically, Scooter feels, which goes back to the ordinance that Shane talked about that came out of Gravity 1, that fill mitigation need to be tied to, stacking dirt. Now, all these don't apply in X. Everything applies to AE. The question that we had, Randy, is after you hit, let's say, for example, I guess X isn't elevation, though. X is just a zone, so you really can't get out of X. So, I mean, the question is, it only applies to A and AE.
that's correct.
So subdivisions outside of A and AE, it wouldn't apply, and only those sections that are in A and AE would apply. And if you're developing more than an acre as a homeowner, it wouldn't apply. They do want to stop the small, I think he didn't have an issue with what I had in Watson, where they were stacking dirt up on small lots, that where you didn't have time to protect your neighbor from.
I understand that, maybe you want to take time.
So what happened, what spurred the ordinance on the first time is in Watson, they had a bunch of lots that they had bought that were old, and they had to basically pile 6 foot of dirt up next to houses that were already constructed. So basically, some guy's looking out his window at a slab next door, and there's on those small lots, there's no place to stop that runoff of water before it gets on your neighbor. So that was kind of what spurred the dirt fill ordinance to begin with. And I think what Mr. McMorris said is that since lots an acre above, it wouldn't really apply to them. It would apply to subdivisions, or lots that were less than an acre. And then there's a amount you could, stack, and it had to have a certain amount of slope and, whatever. And you had to create swell ditches on your property to stop the runoff from impacting your neighbor. And I think other than that, I think everything is basically, I think those are the deals. But to answer your question, Mr. Lobel, the ordinance isn't written. We've been talking about it. And so the only thing Scooter wanted to talk about was is there a provision for fill mitigation in there that would offset the impact, of dirt that, like, if I have a piece of property that's 4 or 5 acres, can I dig the dirt? Which in the last ordinance, there was a provision, but you had to have some engineering done with that because you had to maintain the freeboard, in that deal, Mr. Lobel, or it didn't matter. If you dug a hole and filled it to the top with water, you didn't mitigate the dirt that you were digging and stacking in the
But
floodplains.
one question I have with respect to Zone X, with it not being in there, it seems like you could have a situation where you'd have property in a Zone X and then they could put as much fill as they want. Obviously, they got to dig these detention ponds. Now we have a 20% reduction, which makes them have to dig their ponds probably wider to get the necessary freeboard to store the additional water. It seems like even though you might not be in a situation where you display, or they're going to spread that dirt on the site and maybe even raise it up. I don't know if it would be greater than 3 feet like we're talking about, but you could have, even though you're in a flood zone X situation, you could have an impact in a flash flood event, not necessarily
Eventually, it's gonna impact.
100-year
Sure.
flood.
Eventually, it will
rainfall
And I don't
event where-
disagree. I think
So
there
should
should.
that be considered as well?
Well, see, look, Scott, I'm not an engineer, so some of this stuff I gotta rely on other people. Eddie Idell told me when we were talking about, oh, I was trying to steal your keys.
Yeah.
By the way, over here. That's okay. So, Eddie Idell told me that in like the area where he lives in, which is down there, that dirt field, the dirt field ordinance that we talked about was less impactful in your area because of the type flooding that you got. He explained it to me, and I can't regurgitate that to you now, and he could explain it whatever. So the only difference between basically Mr. McMorris's ordinance and the one we talked about back in the day, Randy, was that I felt engineered dirt was engineered dirt. You know what I'm talking about? So it needed to be exempt. That was my feeling. And so he only wants us to apply to A and AE. And then he says that because of larger lots won't be impactful to their neighbor, that he felt that they should be exempt. So I'm just telling you what, it was always that X was always exempt, and it was specifically exempt because you're an engineer. Maybe you can explain to me better why.
I think from a flooding perspective, you won't have a situation necessarily in a Zone X, but that doesn't stop a flash flood. So a flash flood is probably like a 6-inch rain in a 2 to 3 hour period, and we know that makes our streams and stuff reach a certain capacity, and it's where it could back up into somebody's yard and maybe even in their house, and it comes up, it's in your house for 30 minutes and then it's gone. It's not a big event like a 100-year flood event where, and one of the things that Mr. Idell might have been talking about, even down south where we're at, you're governed more by flood waters having a sheet flow rather than channel flow when you get up higher in the Amite River drainage basin. So the water does have a lot more area to spread out and cover, and so there's different characteristics that start happening, and it's also a lot of wind-driven stuff down there where we're at, and whenever you start experiencing that 100-year rainfall event, if water stacked up in Lake Marpaw and it doesn't have a place to go, then
you and I both know if the wind's blowing the wrong direction and stacked up, I don't think any amount of ordinance will fix that, will it? Ultimately,
Just won't make it worse, is what he's.
No, but I guess all I'm talking about from a Zone X perspective would be to have something there that's going to protect somebody, because if you build up alongside of your neighbor, even if they're not required to, but they do it anyway, there's going to have a runoff that doesn't. It's not necessarily tied to flooding, in my opinion, but it's just pushing water on somebody else that's going to make it sit in their yard.
So we think of something in Zone X, maybe not quite as restrictive, but just something instead of, hey, do what you want to in X. Yeah, I mean,
I think right now they're doing what they want to.
I agree with that.
I mean, I think we
I'm
can hash
fighting
it
that
out. I
battle
think-
in my district.
I think that, I mean, like Randy can talk to what he talked about the other night, is that because he was in X.
Hey, look, y'all shop at the same place?
Yeah.
All right.
That's what they sell down there in
Dude, that's the
Marlboro.
style down there. I got one of
Listen
them
to
shirts
that.
when I go to the camp too. I think I
When,
got a
when
blue
you
and
buy
a
your
regular.
crickets, they get you a shirt. You know, do that. Look, mine's a little bit different than what Scott's talk about, my input. And I agree that we can work on this. We got plenty of time. I live in Zone X, okay? And I never hauled any dirt on my place other than when 1979 when I dug a pond and put on my place, the dirt in a bin. But I guess because we didn't have the flooding problems we have now, my house, you've been there, Gary, it's on the ground. You know, that it's flat on the ground. I haul dirt now once a year because the floodwaters gets closer and closer to my house. It wasn't like that 10 years or 15 years or 20 years or 30 years. I've been in my house since 1979. So it wasn't like that then. Now, all my neighbors got the same problem I got. If we're not allowed to haul dirt, the dirt is keeping the floodwaters from coming in, the tide waters, I said floodwaters, it's keeping the tide water, the east wind from blowing it in. What has made our problem even worse, we have several problems. We have problems when people, neighboring parishes build levees and pump water. But we also have problems when St. John and St. James builds that funnel, which they have already done through the McElroy Swamp. It's like a point. If you look at the map, it aims straight to my house. I could probably walk from here to the parking lot to Lake Marpar from my house, you know. I live on Preston Point, which is not on a map, but it's where we know where it's at. All those people in that community, there's very few hills in Whitehall that's higher than I am, yet I buy flood insurance. Didn't have to until 5 years ago, you know, in 16. That's the first time like everybody else. If I'm not allowed, or my neighbors are not allowed to fill dirt's what I call it, to fill the low spots, to keep the water from rushing in, you know, then I have to worry about tide water. And tide water, I don't want to worry about that right now. It's enough that I have to worry about 4-inch rains or big rains. The tide water is something that, being so close to where we at, I just feel we should be able to allow to haul dirt to protect our property. First, our property is sinking from all that water that comes, you know. If water don't get in your house, it's still in your yard. If it doesn't get in your house, it's still in your yard. And you're losing your property, keeps sinking. If water sits, property sinks.
So if it sits in your yard, your property becomes lower and lower.
And look, I don't believe that it's anyone's intention to keep you from getting, like, I have low spots
Right.
on my property that I get dirt hauled in. I'm just flattening it out again. I just have to do that like every 5 years. I have to get a load or two and flatten it out. So I don't think anybody's trying to stop that.
Scott, and that's what I'm saying, I think you could do both maybe. Scott's got a great idea. What if someone built a big subdivision right next to my house? And they'll be in X2 if they're right next to my house. And what if they decide to take all the dirt they built on the detention pond, whatever it is, and pile it up? Then look how much higher they're gonna be than me.
Yep.
So that's the point Scott's making. The point I'm making is opposite of that, but we're gonna have both situations. So how do we govern that? How do we, you know, make something to help both sides, I guess is what I'm saying.
If
And
we
that's
looked at
I'm
changing
sorry.
the elevation of your property would be the issue.
That's right.
Not filling in, keeping it level, just changing your elevation.
That's right.
That's the problem,
Yeah.
you know?
Well, I believe there's a middle ground we can reach on this. I mean,
That's what I'm saying. I think we can. I think there's both sides to the problem. You know, I was one of those guys a few years ago, was very emotional, didn't see that aside. I just seen what I had to deal with. I was seeing what the neighbors had to deal with. Up here now, I know I got to govern for everybody in the parish, not just myself or my neighbors, you know.
yep,
So-
exactly. So I think there's a way we can, but I also don't want to, depending on where we get with going forward on a certain part of it, at some point you got to put it through and then work on the other part too. You know, just because you pass an ordinance doesn't mean that's the end of it.
You
You
can
know,
keep tweaking that ordinance when you find the problems.
correct.
You know, you can
But I do believe, and I agree with Mr. Lobel, and that's something that occurred to me, you know, we just eliminate X, but problems still occur in X, or more to the point, problems that don't exist now can start existing in X, and you have to kind of curtail that as well. There's a limit. There's something language we could put for X too, because I've seen houses that I know are in X that are, I mean, they're 12 feet off the ground, and I don't even know how they mow that. How do they get the grass to stick on that? I don't know.
Well, and what you were bringing up, Mr. Randy, I don't necessarily think it's on the opposite end of the spectrum, because what I'm talking about, because if you have somebody that's in a situation like what you were explaining, you might have 10, 15 acres of property or less, but you're not coming up 3 feet with it. You're governed by, you're not going to put more dirt on your property, regardless of how big it is, to where it's going to make it flow back to your house. So you have a limit, or that property owner would have a limit to how much they're going to do. Now, they might be bringing in 100, 150 yard truckloads of dirt, but to me, that's significantly different than a subdivision with acreage that's going to build up a whole site 2 feet, 3 feet. I don't think that in what you're talking about, somebody's going to do something. They might be bringing in what we think is a lot of dirt, but they're probably not coming up a couple of feet, because they're limited to where their house is at. And if their house is already low and they're trying to stop something from backing up on their house, it's not going to be a massive dirt operation.
Oh, you're right. They can only fill in where the house isn't, and you don't want to put too much, otherwise you're going to be pushing the water back on your house. Yeah. Okay. Anybody else? All right, so let's go ahead. We'll move on. We'll just move this to the next meeting. Okay. New business. A, family partitions. Did you want to speak on this, Mr. Delap?
Guys, y'all gonna hate me, but I'm still not ready to move forward with this. There's a couple of things I want to tie into this. I truly want it to be for families and family partitions. I don't want it to be where it's full of loopholes and somebody says my aunt's moving in, and then 6 weeks later, they selling it again and giving it to somebody else. We haven't worked all those out. I also want to tie this into, believe it or not, I think one of Garrett's pet peeves is when we do minor subdivisions, I'm having them all over District 8. At Old River, I got 3 of them going on right now. And what they do, they buy a piece of property that don't look like nobody else would have thought of even putting houses there. Now they want to subdivide it and put 8, 10, 11 homes, or lots. Most of the time it's going to be a trailer or something like that. But the problem is they're getting around all the stuff by going small. And we need to find a way to tie those two in together. And we know that families would have something maybe notarized saying this is true, and you're not going to be able to sell the land to somebody else and expect the same breaks or benefits. You'd have to go through the procedure again if the family member dies out or you want to do something different with the land. And we have worked, mostly Lauren has worked on this. We have got the information from planning what they did in the past, and it just doesn't work out because there's too many loopholes. I can see the places where they can turn around and do that. I'm asking you to give me 2 more weeks, if you don't mind, and let us try to work some of this stuff out, this language. I don't think we're gonna be able to satisfy planning on it. I'm gonna tell you that much. Can I say that? I don't know if I can say that.
You can say that.
Okay.
They're not satisfied with a lot of stuff we've done.
Okay,
Yeah, so we understand.
I got some pushback is what I'm trying to say, okay? So I need 2 more weeks. I don't want to introduce it at the next meeting if y'all give me that time and let me see what we can do. In the meantime, would y'all have a problem if we would tie that in, the minor subs into this too, or y'all think that's too much?
We eliminated family partitions because of the loopholes. So I'm all for protecting those people and allowing them to be able to subdivide their property that they want to give their descendants or whatever. But at the same time, if we're going to do that, we got to tighten up the minor resub deal because
I'm committed to doing that.
I'm looking at a situation. You saw what I was facing last 2 weeks ago. I got 14 lots coming on the road. There are not 14 houses on that road now that's that's narrow and whatever, and so we've got issues. We talking about somebody that bought a parcel of land, 4 lots, put them back together. Now, and the way the ordinance is written, technically putting them back together is not a resub, so it doesn't have to wait 2 years. They took 4 lots, put it into 2. And I tried to lobby the attorney today that like it's either 1 lot or it's 4 lots. And then figure out if it's 1 lot, then they can do 7, we can deal with that. But when you took 4 and made 2 out of it, I think you had to wait and resubmit at a later date, and I don't think I was too successful on that, but anyway.
We got, that I know in my area, probably 3 to 5 developers that is not really developers. They just go out there and they look to buy share sales land and how to flip it that fast. And this is what they're doing. They're going around, they're having the loopholes. And they causing as much impact as some of the developers, the big developers.
Yeah.
And I got one on a dead-end road right now. I don't even know how he thinks he can get accomplished what he's trying to get, but the people are in an uproar, okay? And I'm telling him under the current law, I can't stop him, but I think it's time for me to try to come up with a solution to stop him. And
Yeah, has he made a submittal yet?
he hasn't made it. He's made 2 submittals on 2 different ones. He hasn't made one on Lewis Road yet.
See, that's the issue. Mine went before the changes of 125 came about, so you at least can hit him with the density thing, and you can hit him with the road width thing, which I'm struggling with because mine was done before. But Chris is saying that because of the road, because of when we talked about the 18 and 20, we talked about safety as the main driving force behind this deal. That I might have an option, but anyway, just for food for thought, Randy, you do have some options that are
I can
coming
do that
at you
on
on
Lewis
that deal.
Road. Yes, I can do that.
And ultimately, too, I think that, like, show them what you got there, Jeff, the map. Jeff got his zoning map. If you zone those things, and generally, if it's a big piece of land, they're not gonna be able to do that just by categorically,
Some of them are just like half-acre lots is what they, you know what I'm saying?
Well, yeah.
And-
Randy, like, so we got some of the things that's got acre minimums, 3 acre minimums, whatever, they're not gonna be able to,
If you zone it, if you
Yeah.
zone it.
You zone it,
I
that's
understand
1
what
acre
you're saying.
lots.
I understand what you're saying.
yeah, I mean, you can.
we got some
It
solutions
doesn't help you
coming.
now.
We got some solutions coming, but we gotta bridge to that point.
Yeah.
If you would allow me to bring it back at the next meeting, and the people, if they want to say anything, I have no problem with that. I just won't have many answers.
Okay, let's go. Anybody got any? Scott? Mom on this one? Y'all good?
Family partition?
Mr. McMorris? Anything? All right. All right, item B, fire protection alternatives. I think the fire department,
I talked to Chief Wascom, they weren't quite with Eddie, so he asked to put it off 2 more weeks.
and that's
I
in their
told him It's
court.
on them. It's all in their court.
Y'all
so-
see Ms. White's questions behind the ordinance.
Yeah.
Things that have to be addressed that we gotta, part of the stuff that we've gotta address on that deal, so.
Yeah.
Y'all have Mr. Joe, I'm not gonna butcher his name, Mr. Joe's notes back there.
Kozlowski.
So I just took that and kind of ran with it and looked up all the codes they were talking and, found some, additional information. I have not heard from any of them, I would assume because of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think they're,
and I think they have a meeting going on in Holden right now with OxyChem, so.
Here's the basis, they've been sent this, and then there's some questions that we need to iron out, so.
All right. Any discussion? Item C, Chapter 125 discussions, Mr. Talbert.
well, I think there's a couple things. Here, let me. This is one we want to talk about. I don't know if y'all realize it, but the state's got some aspects of mobile homes, portable buildings, whatever. In Livingston Parish, we're not doing, so what we're asking is to go to 125-6 building permit office requirements, moving and placing of a new or used mobile home or modular building, manufactured home, modular home, travel trailers, or mobile commercial building intended for occupancy or storage only approved and properly skirted HUD standard mobile homes manufactured after July 1, 1994. That's the HUD mobile home code date, and having the required and exterior fixed red metal ID label and proper ownership documentation shall be permitted to be placed within the parish boundaries. Those units located in the parish not meeting these standards at the time of enactment of this section are allowed to remain, are grandfathered as non-conforming, but shall only be replaced by HUD standard conforming units and may not be relocated within the parish boundaries unless they are conforming structures properly permitted by the parish and being the 1994 manufacture date shown herein. And you say 1994, that's old, but that's when they started out with
Yeah.
wind zones. You know what I'm talking about?
That's what
We
it
are
was
a coastal
rating.
parish, so
Yep.
we need to be sure that we're letting trailers come into our parish. And I'm gonna tell you what brought it to my attention is that a gentleman in St. Helena called me and wanted to know if I knew where some lots were for sale in Livingston. Because he had some trailers he couldn't permit in St. Helena, but we wasn't really enforcing that ordinance, so he wanted to bring them up here and permit them. So in doing some research, I realized that
We need to make a change.
we need to do something a little different. So basically, that's what it is. It's just if you've got an old mobile home, you're good. But if you go to replace it, it needs to be replaced with at least a 94 or newer, which has a wind zone rating. And then if you have an old one, you can't move it. Once you move it off your property, then it is basically not good anymore because it's not going to have that sticker that's going to allow it to be permitted at a later date. So that's what we're suggesting. I think we need to do a little research and figure out what zones, because I think we got two different wind zones, one below the interstate and one above the. Yeah, so we got to figure out, we need to make sure, we need to tie a wind zone to the rating of the trailer, because I think, Randy, I think you had a situation in your district recently about somebody, trying to, make a second floor on a trailer. So, I mean, there's some,
I wanna see that. I wanna see that.
there's some things going on that we got to, resolve, but
There's one thing, guys, I'm a little confused about. When I was building official, and I know it's the same way, we had no authority to enforce anything on a manufactured home. That's done by the fire marshal in the state of Louisiana. So I'm not saying we can't pass an ordinance to make it tougher or whatever, but I know that they have the final say. The same way as the situation on my trailer, we couldn't stop them from building it until we got the fire marshal involved. And basically we put a stop work order on there, they continued to work, we did. They knew that the fire marshal regulates them and not the building department.
Randy, all we're doing is saying that you're gonna have to have a permit for a trailer, and we're not gonna issue a permit unless it's newer than 94. So that's the only change is we're not trying to regulate trailers.
Yeah,
We're just trying to say that you can't bring a trailer in this parish that doesn't have the HUD sticker, only so we can figure out what the wind rating needs to be, because right now, if you pre-94, there is no wind rating on it. And that's where we're in an error.
and before we give them a permit or what they call, a CO or whatever it's called, before we allow that, we still have to have that from the fire marshal saying that trailer's regulated.
Right.
It's there.
I know
So-
the city of Walker, we did this when I was a councilman in the city of Walker, and I can't remember what the wind rating was, but it was essentially if your mobile home wasn't manufactured after this date, you can't bring it in. So I believe we all thought it was that way there then, but we actually had to write an ordinance that says, and I can't remember what it was, like a 5 or something like that.
I don't know, there's a wind
Yeah.
zone 2, wind zone 3, there's
Yeah.
different wind zones, and this parish is divided, is the interstate the dividing line, or is it, is it, Randy, is it 190, or is it the interstate that's the line? Isn't it one of those boundaries that's a,
One of those are the boundaries, and I was gonna say interstate.
Might be one of them.
I think it's the interstate, actually, because we didn't have that discussion. If Walker sits on both sides of 190, so I would believe it's probably the interstate, but I might be wrong.
but basically, it's just, I think there's, it's 15 miles an hour further higher below than it is above, so it's just one of those deals.
I guess you have to keep in mind, too, that if you have a couple of things on this. One, if the electricity goes off, or you don't pay electric bill, can you pay electric bill? They can go ahead and turn.
About moving.
Okay, about moving?
So you can,
Okay.
if you're in a spot, you can continue to keep
stay
that
in that
spot
spot.
permitted to get power turned on.
Gotcha.
If you choose to move out and move something else in, it's gotta come with one with a tag. And once you move that one out, you can't put it anywhere in this parish anymore.
I think that's gonna be easy, because
Yeah.
even on outfield, if you want to build a shop,
Yeah.
on outfield.
We're gonna make sure we straight along, that's all.
Gotcha. Discussion from the public? Did you want to move this forward?
No, I think we still gotta get some, I think
Yeah,
we
we gotta
need
get
to,
a
we
little
need to
more
tie the
information.
wind thing to it. We
Okay.
just talked about the date code, we're gonna go tie some wind stuff.
All right, that's it. All right, Ms.
So
White, please.
we had a huge discussion with planning about the 60-day state law about preliminary plats being approved if no action had been taken. We all know we had a situation, we had found some loopholes. We now, we passed the ordinance, we changed 125, we now require them to present studies at the planning commission at stage 3, is it?
2 or 3?
It's
Stage two.
is
it's
it
2.
Okay. So the planning department is concerned that since a submittal date is not, we do not have a submittal date laid out in our ordinance. So they're worried that if the submittal date goes by the date that they email them, like which is how they have been doing it for years, the 60 days will come up a lot faster and the studies will not be done. So that,
I thought our understanding in the discussion was that the original submittal that notified the public, have them come make their comments, that let it move forward to get to the studies, was, and I forget what term, Lee used a term. It wasn't preliminary, it was something before preliminary, temporary or.
Tentative.
Tentative. I think, my understanding is when we voted on it, is the submittal date would be when all the studies were completed, and that's when it was submitted. At that point in time, the 60 days started. Isn't that what you said? I mean, is my understanding that, and if we need to,
need to clarify that.
change
We need
the
to clarify that, we
definition,
will.
if we need to change the definition,
okay.
fix
So
that.
stage 3 does say preliminary plat submittal and other supplementary materials. So we need to just add a blurb in there, really simple. I mean, it says it, but to be
That's when
especially
we just-
clear.
Just put
it
in there,
needs
that's
to
when the
say-
60 days
It
started.
said it, and that was the 10th, but if they not,
Let's put it,
Let's
yeah,
just put
let's
in there,
give it
that's
to
when the
them.
60 days come.
So the 60 days is gonna start at the submittal to the planning commission, which is stage
Stage
3.
three,
So
yeah.
the submittal date is going to be the planning commission date, okay? They are still not convinced that 60 days from that date is enough to get the studies done. So my suggestion,
The studies will be done at that point in time.
it have to be done or they can't go. They can't submit if the
They
studies
shouldn't be
are
able to
not
submit
done.
until they have the studies.
Yeah, they can't submit to the, they could submit, they can do the informal meeting, they could do the first preliminary meeting, but they cannot do the next one until they have all the studies completed.
till stage 3, okay,
And
so
then
stage
that's the
3.
one where the submittal's gonna count. Am I right?
The 60-day thing, is that state law?
That's state law. So all we're gonna
It's written in
say
ours
is that
too.
state law starts.
We just have to define when
State law starts
submittal
at stage
is.
3.
Gotcha.
So the stage 3
When is
submittal is
submittal?
gonna be
Okay, but-
the day of the planning commission meeting that it is.
Actually,
But Ms. White, on our paper, did we put the informal meeting as stage 1 or we did not list that? That's why,
Yes, the
that's why I'm
informal-
confused between 2 and 3.
Informal is 1,
Okay,
the public hearing or the tentative is 2, and then stage 3 is preliminary plat submittal and other
Yeah.
supplementary materials.
So
Okay,
you can just write the language in there to say, you know,
okay, so next, if a revision happens, they have to come back before planning, right? That's how y'all wanted it, that's how you wanted it in the Fonzie ordinance. What constitutes a revision? Well, obviously, anything. And what stage do they have to completely restart? No. They just go back to stage 2?
Depending on what the change is.
We have to define that.
Well, we said just, you go back to the planning commission.
They may submit something, and then planning may say, or the review engineer may say, this is unacceptable, okay? We can't change their submittal date. If they submit it, that's it. But what the key is the inaction. As long as we keep giving them an action, so you gotta go ahead and change this sewer's not gonna work, this flood is not gonna work, what you're doing,
Doesn't it say 60 days with no action?
with no action.
Right.
Yeah,
So-
as long as
so
we're
they-
in communication
yeah.
back and forth,
That's
we're
right.
good.
Yeah, they can deny it.
But to clarify a couple things, we said, if you make a change, meaning in theory, Randy, the flood, when I do a drainage impact study, I'm submitted to Morgan, she's giving me feedback, I'm submitted to her, she give me feedback, I'm submitted to her, she give me feedback. I'm not gonna make the submittal on that until I know she's gonna accept it. So ultimately, when the submittals are done for stage 3, the review engineers pretty much said grace over those things before they go in, so there's really not gonna be, so the issue is gonna be, if I change a lot, I change this, I change that. This is the only thing this is the only thing that concerns me, is there are gonna be instances when a change benefits the public.
That's-
And so how do we address that? For
Okay.
example, like I'm building a subdivision and I'm gonna drill a well. I'm gonna drill my own well and whatever. And then in the case of Valere, French settlement was sold, and so it's a little bit different situation than what was, but it hadn't been accepted, so it's not a big deal. Let's look at Deer Run. Deer Run was within the Denham Springs Sewer District. At the time, Denham Springs said, we're gonna quit taking in subdivisions, so they had to go do their own mechanical plant. Denham Springs has since looked at the situation, and I think they've resolved how they're gonna, it's not finished yet, but ultimately, you know, Denham Springs is gonna try to make some improvements to their sewer system in that area, and Deer Run tying into it is key to making that work. However, Deer Run's been approved with their own mechanical plant. The question is, for the benefit of the whole and the benefit of the community and the benefit of everybody around there, they would be better off served if they tie in to the city sewer. However, under our ordinance, that's a change. So it's a significant change that requires, we don't even call it significant anymore. We just said a change in the future. You know, I think the ordinance as it says now is a change, and it had to be a significant change. So in that situation where it's beneficial to the community, how do we address that? Because if I'm just gonna be honest with you, if I'm the guy, if I'm the developer, and I'm technically got my plans approved with a package unit, and DHH is gonna sign off with the discharge numbers, it doesn't matter if the city's there or not. If I gotta go through the whole process again, why do I wanna make the change for the benefit of the whole? So, I mean, you understand what I'm talking about, Randy? I'm just-
Yeah, I want to answer that. I do understand. I want to answer that. The whole thing about the third stage was to make that change then. That was to, he did, just like using your analogy, you're correct. They're going to pretty much be straight with it because they're going to be going back and forth with Morgan, back and forth, back and forth. Now they think they're ready. She's blessed it. They come to the third stage. Scott comes up here, brings up a good point. That's the time when they'll say, okay, we need now for you to make that change. Whatever that change that put, might have been a turn of lane because a deaf child is there, whatever, I don't know. But whatever that change is, it's still an action to send them back and say, come back with that change, okay? At the next meeting, come back with that change. Because they're not gonna buy it if it's something, or they shouldn't buy it if there's something that was raised up that Morgan didn't catch. She's gonna catch all the X's and O's, she's gonna catch that, but she may not catch what the community has to offer. And that's why that's why Lee, his exact words, Lee Foster said, that's where we get most of our stuff is from the public. We know what to do then. So at that time is when we're gonna make that change. When it goes back, and they said at that time, okay, we're gonna use Denham Springs Sewer. That's almost 2 months in the process. Denham Springs ought to know within that 2 months if they can do that or not. I think that was an exception to the case, and we can't do it. I don't think, once they leave stage 3, I don't think there's gonna be any changes, but very few construction changes, which I don't think has to come back to us or to them.
Let's just clarify, what when it leaves stage 3 with acceptance, then it can't be changed.
my
But
opinion.
in the public hearing part of stage 3, if somebody from the community comes up and says this can happen or that can happen, are we gonna then allow them to modify that plan at that point in time?
On paper, not just by verbal. They can't,
I mean,
yeah, on
I'm-
paper.
So a revision would be if the planning commission, if someone brings something up and the planning commission's like, oh yeah, y'all need to change that. That's
Correct.
considered a revision.
Yeah.
And a resubmittal would be if they get to the planning commission and people start saying stuff and the ODS wants to change something, right? That's,
I don't even think that's a resubmittal. I think once you submit it, you submit it. You're going through the process. We made a progress. Is it 8? How many stages is it? 6? 5, whatever the stages are. Okay, I don't know which ones we counting,
Say
but
something like after construction started?
when construction starts, you're gonna run into construction problems and you gotta make changes. I don't think that has to be a resubmittal.
I think, but I think what Mr. Towert was saying, if a change occurs or could occur that's beneficial to the public.
And that should happen on the third stage.
I agree. And
And yeah.
look, I think that situation with Denham Sewer and whatever is gonna be resolved by
Yes.
then.
Well, I know
But
that.
what I don't wanna do is for them to have gone through the whole process, it not be resolved. And then after they've been accepted and they've got construction plans, the city says, look, I really need those 2,000 homes to make this bond thing work for me to make these upgrades. And then the developer says, dude, I can't do that because if I do that, I gotta go back through the whole process again. That's where I think we need to figure out how you know what, that's all.
I still think it's solved on the third stage because if they're gonna use Denham Springs, they're gonna have a letter from Denham Springs saying they're using them. So I think everything's solved on the third stage. I do think problems run in construction. I had a construction business, happens every day, and you make those minute changes with the blessing of the engineer or whoever's in charge. I just don't think that's a resubmittal when you do that.
Does that, Lauren, does that solve,
I-
you know
I
what change
agree.
wording you need?
yeah, no.
Well, and I think too, it doesn't happen often that they make a change that's
Right.
positive.
Right.
You know, when Foxglove came through in Walker, huge development, I was like, no waivers, not giving you anything, sorry, abide by the law. And then lo and behold, they come through and said, look, we won't have the sewer ready in time. Can we put a temporary plant there? I'm like, no, you cannot put a temporary plant there. And they said, well, if you let us put the temporary plant there, which is a mobile unit, when we're done, we'll give the parish the
Right.
temporary unit. Well, then I was at a crossroads. I'm like, well, you know, they're going to do it anyway. I might as well let them put that temporary plant there for that 6-month period, and then we get this $100,000 temporary plant for the benefit of the whole parish.
We do waivers all the time. If something
Yeah.
extraordinary that we can't think of happens, I mean, that's
Yeah.
what the waivers for.
All right.
I don't.
Good? You good, Jim? We all good?
I think,
What else did she have?
there's a middle date.
Oh, they wanna
statement.
strike out the core thing on subdivisions, cause
Oh, yeah. So if you look on the next one, on stage 7, I left in the jurisdictional wetland blurb about them, but y'all are not letting that happen, so that needs to be struck out. I do need a recommendation for that for Thursday.
we're gonna amend it to strike that part out.
Yeah.
We introduced to do that.
Says the ODS shall supply a Corps of Engineers jurisdictional. Yeah, it says the Stage 7, final plat and bonding for subdivisions with improvements. It says, "The ODS shall supply a Corps of Engineers jurisdictional wetland determination if any jurisdictional wetlands and/or other waters of the United States exist within the parish rights-of-way, utility servitudes, drainage servitudes, or any other public servitude located in this subdivision. Corps of Engineers documentation shall be submitted proving said jurisdictional wetlands and/or other waters of the United States have been mitigated or permitted for." So we just,
Strike it.
yep.
Because Randy, we're doing that, I mean, they can't even get their lot count without determination. It's gonna be submitted early in the deal.
Street standard? 4A, I think, at the top. You got, is that what you're talking about?
The ones I'm talking about is the one I emailed you Y'all probably don't have it on the agenda. Basically, my concern was that we're paying a $500,000 a mile for roads, for us to do a road. And it's my understanding they paid the developer $130,000. I don't know who's making the better deal, or we getting the same road. I want to make sure the specs match, and then we'll look and see at the prices. In other words, I don't want them to build a cheaper road than me 2 years later got to fix it, or 4 years later. Seems like they should be using the same specs we using.
Mr. Sam
in the
added that
subdivision?
into 125.
What?
To make sure subdivision roads have to meet parish standards. Mr. Sam added that in, it's been adopted.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
put that in there.
Yeah.
We amended that.
Randy, I think part of the difference is they're coming in with bare ground, cutting soil cement, and you know what I'm talking about? They're not dealing with traffic, they're not having to go in and chop an old road, they're not having to grind the surface. So I think there's some cost differences in putting a new road from scratch. You cut that 10 inches of soil cement, you cut it in, put your stuff on top, then, put your bottom layer, put your top layer, and you're done. Where when you come out there, you gotta grind the surface. Or depending on how old it is, sometimes if it's a first sale, they'll go ahead and cut, they'll, instead of grinding the asphalt, they'll chop it in the soil cement, just depending on how old it is. There's that deal where they cut the asphalt into the soil cement, depending on what it is. Plus they gotta work in traffic, plus they changing color. I think it's just more complicated to do it after the fact than it is to do a new construction. Like Randy, like a remodel. It costs way more to remodel a house than it does to build a new one. So I think that's part of the cost
I
there.
just want to make sure it's the same specs.
I got you.
I just need a positive recommendation for this one change.
You talking about the one change with the
Wetlands.
wetland?
To strike it?
To strike it and introduce it.
I'll
on
make the
Thursday.
motion.
I'll second that.
All right. Motion by Mr. Talbot, second by Mr. Ard. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All right.
What is a knockbox and a collapse zone?
That is another thing for Mr. Joe, so we can just defer,
Okay.
I think, everything else. That was gonna be under other business.
Okay, but that's in the,
A
that's,
Knox box is an access box, and he wants them on commercial and multifamily, like gated communities or fences, so if something happens, they have access.
Gotcha.
and the collapse zone is,
He wants the fire.
he wants the backflow preventer outside of the collapse zone of the building. Is that what he's talking about?
Yes, that and,
Which
fire
typically,
department connections and backflow preventers shall be installed at least 1.5 times the collapse zone of the structure. Yeah.
look, I don't have, the backflow preventer is gonna be a problem in some places. And the only reason I'm gonna tell you that is, like, for example, at my truck stop, the water meter is beside the building. So we either gotta change the law where you put a water meter, if we're gonna require that the backflow preventer be 1.5 times the structure, then the water meter gotta be 1.5 times the structure. I mean, that's all, you know what I'm talking about, Randy, because
know exactly what you're
what you don't
talking
wanna do
about.
is have the water meter by the building, and then have to run a line 1.5 times
Right.
out, and then bring it back to the building.
Y'all code is the backflow preventer has to be against the water meter. Now,
Right, so-
I don't know that you can do the backflow preventer. The first one is no problem. You can pass that and go on with it.
But the backflow preventer's-
Lockbox is no problem.
The backflow preventer is the issue. I mean, it just depends. Like, you can go by some of these schools and commercial buildings. You see the pipes coming out of the ground with the silver, the insulation wrapped around. That's the backflow preventer. But those things are done. But there are some that you don't see that because that water meter is right up by the building and the backflow preventer is right by the water meter, which is where it's supposed to be.
I can tell you, and unless I'm mistaken here, but I can tell you how it used to be is where the loophole is they're not getting certified every year. That's where.
The water company's enforcing that. They sending out letters annually. So I mean, that's where the certifications come in.
I know some that hadn't been certified in 5 years today.
That might be certain. Yeah, it's a water company issue.
Any discussion from the audience? All right, guys, that's it.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn by Mr. Talbot, second by Mr. Hart. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Meeting is adjourned.